Karen, to save you from me doing much of a bio, I used to be a journalist and spent a lot of, almost 30 years wandering across America, chasing presidential candidates, hurricanes, western wildfires, just about anything that I could convince my editors to send me out on and get them to pay for. So spent a lot of time on the Texas-Mexican border and spent some time in Dallas as a reporter there. Really liked Texas a lot. Always thought I'd wind up back there, but that's not how life has turned out. So instead, I've written novels that are set in Texas and northern Mexico, which is a land I particularly love. My first book is The Last Second Chance, and it features a rather battered and defrocked Dallas private investigator named Ed Earl Birch. And in this one, he's being hired by an old flame who, kind of a rattlesnake of a woman, who will use him and drop him like a bad habit if she needs to. And he's trying to keep her alive after the woman's husband, a financier from Houston, who wound up ripping off some mob clients, has taken a powder and has left her kind of holding the bag. So, as I said, I really love Texas. I love that stark, mountainous beauty of the border country. And what I'm going to read to you from is two passages from two chapters that are set right on the border in the Big Bend country of Texas. And the action is that Ed Earl, with a sidekick named Mr. Slick, have got to go by horseback over the border, across the river, and go after the fugitive financier. The rump of the horse in front of his was flecked with sweat, its muscular movement giving him the focus for a long stretch of self-hypnosis. He needed it to keep himself riding upright on the bright rim of pain this jaunt through rough border country was shooting through his battered shoulder and taped and tendered ribcage. It didn't help much, but it beat getting another narcotic jolt from Mr. Slick and becoming so zombified he fell out of the saddle. Pride wouldn't let him do that. Not in front of these vaquero compadres, the Spider of the Guitar King. His mount was a big-chested sorrel gelding named Shorty. A bit of cowboy humor in that name, since Shorty was bigger than most cow ponies, more than 16 hands tall, with the longer legs and heavier build that suggested some extra thoroughbred or gated saddlebred blood in his veins, which made Shorty a smoother trail horse that still had plenty of cow sense, the kind they used to breed for the ranch foreman or owner who needed to cover a lot of ground in a day's time without getting pummeled by the gait of a short-coupled quarter horse. This was fine by Birch. The two vaqueros were named Silva and Dag, short for Dagoberto. They were cousins out of a long line of Mexican cowhands, flashier and crueler with their mounts than their Anglo counterparts, a threadbare haughtiness to the set of their sweat-stained hats, the way they wore their worn chaps and jeans, their upright riding styles, and the touch of tarnished silver on their oil-colored saddles. Silva was thin, tan, and mustached, quick and live. Dag was shorter, stockier, and darker. Both rode roan cow ponies. Silva's had a white blaze between its eyes. Both were hands for the O2, one of the big spreads, once part of the A.S. Gage empire, but now owned by a big back east corporation that ran a line of freighters and tankers, made luncheon meats, mined kaolin, and treated the ranch as much as a tax write-off as a working cattle operation. They left Spider's Rancho around 3, bouncing down off the main road and onto a rutted cow trail that ran the north bank toward La Linda. They tacked up and slipped over the river in the early morning darkness, letting the icy water slide up and over horse bellies and human thighs, clenching their teeth against the chattering chill as the wind hit their wetness on the other bank. It would take them a day's ride to get close enough to the old mining town to scope it out. A backcountry cut through what was once part of Villa's domain, home to bandits and smugglers, rustlers and prospectors, and Candelaria workers, harvesters of the spiky desert plant that yielded a rich wax coveted for its polishing luster. Forbidding country, rough, arid, and isolated, but sparsely majestic and not deserted. Hippie river rats lived upriver in Terlingua and Lajitas. Inside the Big Bend National Park were ghost communities like Solis, La Clocha, and San Vicente, now the primitive campsites for the hardy backpacker or river rafter. And on the other side of the river, Boquillas del Carmen, a tourist stop for rafters looking for a cold beer after a run through the rapids, a haven known for the smugglers who sprung to life in the dark hours. There weren't many roads, just a dirt and gravel track that ran between La Linda and Boquillas, hugging the south bank of the river. They stayed clear of it using old cattle and smuggling trails that crisscrossed the promontories that highballed the Santa Elena, Mariscal, and Boquillas canyons, then laced their way down to flatter country that ran between those rocky spines. The last of the winter rains were still fresh on the land, brightening the dull desert browns and grays with bursts of olives, ochres, reds, and yellows, darkening the rocky outcroppings with moisture. The tangy creosote odor of the greasewood was strong in the air, the scent of telephone poles after a thunderstorm. There was a damp chill that hung across their shoulders and seeped into their lungs as they rode. Birch fumbled in his pockets for Lucky's and his Zippo. Shorty's ears pricked up at the snickering metal sound of the lighter, head rising and alert, then slowly lowering. It hurt to suck down the first lungful of smoke, but Birch did it anyway, twice, 3 times. He pulled up to the side of the trail and waited for Mr. Slick to catch up, careful not to spur his horse into the cat's claw and Spanish dagger that reached out from the sides of the narrow sand track. This next passage I'm going to read is pretty personal to me because it talks a lot about, or borrowed heavily from my experience with my father's death, who died of Alzheimer's at age 75. And I made this at Earl's daddy. Birch saw the smoky pre-dawn mist snake through the draws leading down to the river. Thought of a place half a continent away from here and felt the faraway pain of a dead parent gallop up into his throat. His daddy died 4 months after his 75th birthday, wasted by weeks in the hospital and years of a hateful disease that ate away his memory and storytelling wit and withered his working man's body into a shuffling spindle. Near the end, the best painter in Coppell, when sober, didn't know his only son, wouldn't speak to his only wife, and called his only daughter by his wife's name. In those last days, with his wrists tied to keep him from jerking the IV lines out of his arms, and the food tube out of his nose, his hazel eyes would widen in anger, and his big horsey head would stubbornly swing away whenever Mama leaned in close to tell him she loved him and was glad he was still alive. At the very end, when he coded in the recovery room after doctors cut a hole in his stomach and inserted a food tube, he recovered just long enough to ask the nurse to let him die. Then he was gone. She buried him in a peach-colored blazer, an off-white shirt, and a navy tie peppered with daisies and other flowers. With his blotched, parchment-thin skin and shrunken features, he reminded Birch of an old black waiter, ready to serve double bourbons and scotches at the clubhouse for fat white money and its frat rat sons, white folks slick back and sleek after 18 holes and a long hot shower. Resting in his copper-colored casket, Daddy didn't look like the man who could knock back bourbon and beer at the American Legion all night and knock out flawless trim work with a blinding hangover in the still heat of day, squinting through sweat and the smoke curling up from a Lucky on his lip. He didn't look like the man who could make you laugh with long-winded country tales or stop you dead with a wild and murderous glare. That man died long before the gaunt figure in the casket did. And when Mama leaned in to tell him she loved him one last time, the stubborn fire was gone, his eyes were closed, and he didn't turn away. It was fine for Mama, but it stabbed Birch badly with the hard truth that he had put a lot of distance between himself and his father's long, slow decline, widening a gap he would never be able to close. Daddy's final resting place was the third deck of an above-ground burial vault out near Farmer's Branch, at the end of a cemetery far from his home in the North Carolina mountains, miles away from the graves of his father and mother, and 2 younger sisters who could backsass him until he was tongue-tied in anger, then stand back and sweetly call him by the Christian name no one called him, and ask why his face was so red and he was stuttering so badly. Birch stood beside his mama as the preacher said all the proper words that made her cry, and didn't feel a thing except for the wide rivulet of sweat that ran down his back and into the crack of his butt, causing the fabric of his dark gray polyester blend suit to stick to his skin. The service ended and one of his ex-wives stepped forward to hug his neck. She was the second ex, the cocktail waitress he married between the one who tore his heart out and the one who got killed by the black hitman with the bad toupee and the high-pitched voice. This ex only stayed with him for 3 months. She never spoke to him after the divorce, but loved his daddy and would flirt with him whenever he answered the phone when she called Mama, who stayed friends with all of his exes. He was surprised to see her, but it was only a surface reaction. Nothing else rose up to break through his numbness. A week after the funeral, after paying the undertaker and the hospital and carting Mama down to the lawyer's office so he could send the will to probate court, Birch drove for 2 days to the little hamlet outside Asheville where his daddy, the grandson of a Klansman and the great-nephew of a hanging judge, grew up. He walked what was left of the family homestead with his cousin George, a stumpy version of himself, cursed with the same belly, bald head, big eyes, and beard as Birch, but about a half foot closer to the ground. It was a full-blown redneck kind of day, one that started well before sunup, but well after George's usual wake-up hour. Birch remembered the year Daddy got laid off from the refinery down in Texas City and moved the family back to North Carolina, settling into the old home place where his grandfather still lived, a rambling house built of peg poplar with a pepperbox entrance and a long porch running down the front wall. George would wake up his daddy, Gus, who would rise at 3 a.m. to fix a breakfast of eggs, ham, and red-eyed gravy. Then he'd call down to the Birch house. Bill, you up yet? No, George, just who in the hell do you think is talking to you? Be down for breakfast. By the time his daddy pulled on his trousers and headed to the kitchen barefoot to light the wood stove, George would be banging through the pepperbox door, wondering what was on the menu for his second breakfast. Birch's time with his cousin wound through a silent rising light and a stand at the end of a sloping field of green, waiting for the smoky mist to rise up out of the hollows and a groundhog to pop into the crosshairs of his cousin's rifle. That same half-light mist was rising in front of him now, thousands of miles from the lush green mountains of his daddy's kin, with the sharper spined peaks of the stark gray Sierra del Carmens as a backdrop. It didn't matter. The memories rose to mind with the mist. So did the remembered hours with his cousin, a huge roadhouse breakfast of eggs, flapjack, grits, ham, and coffee. A session in an old man's garden, baiting have-a-heart traps with grape jelly for the raccoons that were tearing up the corn and lettuce. An hour shoveling sawdust into a small trailer for another old man to use in his garden. It ended with a brush-busting walk along the line of the 6 acres that remained in the Birch family name, digging through the ruins of an old springhead that watered cows through the Depression years, spending a half hour picking ripe blackberries from a snake haven of thorny vines. It was in the same spot where he and Mama picked berries 4 decades before. Back when he was 5, in a tiny pump house his father built over the wellhead he drilled for his own daddy was shiny and white, and seemed as big as the weathered outhouse behind the old home place. The cousins picked up the free and easy talk that carried them through the morning, joking the way only 2 middle-aged men who had seen a lot and were comfortable with each other will do. They picked berries until their hands were stained, then George took him home, gave him a shot of homemade blackberry wine, let him shower, and walked him to his rig for their long ride back to Texas. Birch's legs and back were sore, but he felt clean, fresh, and buoyant from the shower and his time in the close highland of his kinfolk, moving through a working Saturday with his cousin. There was that brief dark moment at the old home place, but it passed quickly. Maybe he had said all his goodbyes to Daddy through the 5-year decline of the Alzheimer's, he thought. Maybe all he would feel was relief, that his mother wouldn't have to burn herself out trying to take care of a man angry about her trying to keep him alive, that his daddy didn't have to spend any more time as a helpless vegetable, that he wouldn't have to feel so damn guilty about not pitching in any more than he did. What rode through the front of his mind wasn't grief or guilt. It was the dawn mist, the humped ridgeline, and the keening note that sang through his blood in the ancient Highlander way, reminding him it didn't matter he was born in the flatlands of Texas, but he and his daddy were of mountain stock, and, for a short time, that he was stepping through the land in which his people were born to live. He headed west on I-40 and pointed toward Knoxville, pushing his rig through the hairpin mountain turns, punching up a college FM station playing bluegrass. He listened to Bill Monroe blaze through 3 of his standards, including Blue Moon of Kentucky and Walls of Time, the old man's plaintive wail drawing a tighter line through the Celtic call that was already stirring in Birch's chest. Whipping through a long set of downhill curves, he nodded his head in time to the Stanley Brothers' rank stranger, barely noting the high-pitched gravel of the runaway truck ramp that flashed into his window. Then J.D. Crowe, Tony Rice, and Doyle Lawson sang Model Church, a song about an old man talking to the soul of his dead wife, telling her about finding a place of worship that had that old-time ring. The singing was accompanied only by a lightly strummed guitar and a stand-up bass. The lyrics were carried by the tight harmony of the 3 men, recounting the old man's joy at finding comfort in a church that made him feel like some wrecked Marine who gets a glimpse of shore. The string in his chest broke and a ball of black grief rose up from his stomach and into his throat. Tears blurred his vision, and he heard a strangled cry fill the cab of his rig, drowning out the song. He bawled all the way down the backside of the mountain pass, which was not the smartest thing in the world to do. Cars and tractor-trailer rigs roared past, horns blaring. He didn't give a damn. He mourned for his daddy, barely able to see the road, never touching the brakes, not giving much of a damn if he flew off the foreman. When he got down to a flatter stretch of highway, he turned off at the first exit and pulled into the gravel lot of a barbecue restaurant called the Pig Pit. He pulled out a bandana, blowing his nose and wiping the clear trail of tears and mucus from his beard and mustache. This is how it hits you, he thought. Not beside the casket looking down at the dead body of your daddy. Not when an ex-wife hugs your neck at the graveside service and whispers her regrets. Not even when your own mama breaks down and sobs out her misery. You get nailed after a glorious redneck day with a cousin, rambling over the land of your father and his ancestors, the place of all the old family myths and experiences. Your heart broken open by a bluegrass song your daddy didn't even know, while roaring down a mountain that doesn't care if you live or die. And it hits you 2 years later, sitting stiff and sore on a brushy slope a mile south of the Rio Grande, watching mist that triggers memories. Thanks much, folks.